Finally home. I'm really not sure how to feel about this, though. After all we've been through.
Yeah.
Welcome back to the game collection. It's still summer, it's still blazing hot outside, but it is about time to start wrapping up this year's Summer of Suikoden. I am SuperDerek, and this is Suikoden V. Suikoden V started off its life as a gaiden, or a side story of the Suikoden series. Gradually, the project expanded and grew until it became Suikoden V. This time, Suikoden was written and directed by a new team consisting of director Takahiro Sakiyama, writer Kazuyoshi Tsugawa, and character artist Kaori Fujita. Junko Kawano was not involved in the project, probably because Suikoden V was released in February of 2006, only 5 months after the release of Suikoden Tactics, a game Kawano was heavily involved in. Perhaps this was for the better though, because Suikoden V was to me, and to many others, a return to form for the series. In Suikoden V, you play as the royal prince of the Queendom of Falena, a country governed by the matriarchal Queen Arshtat. As a prince of Falena, you begin the game by fulfilling duties, acting as a representative of the crown, performing menial tasks, and so on, alongside your Aunt Siledes, bodyguard Leon, and George Prime, whom some of you might recognize from Suikoden 2. All is not well in the Queendom, however. During an uprising before the events of the game, the Queen donned the Sun Rune, a true rune that grants immeasurable power, but is causing her to slowly lose her mind to the power of the Sun Rune. Throw in some political intrigue, manipulation, and scheming, and you've set the stage for the story of Suikoden V, which tells a complex tale of civil war full of twists and turns that actually kept me guessing every step of the way. And I loved it. The overall scenario of the game was pretty unique, even for a Suikoden game, but for reasons that would spoil key points of the game if I were to just tell you. But suffice it to say that the game is a very emotionally driven one in the great tradition of the titles that preceded it. Of course, we continue to see the horrors of war, but while some of the Suikodens of the past have given us sympathetic antagonists, this game does the exact opposite, letting you glean just enough of the events on the other side of the curtain to get the player really riled up. The game also forces you to team up with some of the sleaziest slime balls in all of video game history, but the relief you feel when you finally won your hard-earned freedom and finally get to start building your base is something that just cannot be beaten. The game contains political commentary that I think is really well written and timeless, and feels just as relevant today as ever, if not even more so than when the game was originally released. The story that Suikoden V tells, though, is one that held my full attention from start to finish. The beginning definitely had a slow start, but only because there was so much exposition to get through to lay the foundations for the story that would unfold throughout the rest of the game. The events, which don't feel entirely realistic, were at least internally consistent enough to allow me to suspend my disbelief long enough to really enjoy the game. Suikoden V has an absorbing plot that I was excited to uncover, and I just couldn't wait to see what would happen next. The characters were expertly written, and most of the plot twists I didn't actually see coming. If Suikoden V was a book, you might call it a page-turner. But perhaps most important of all is that the game is really fun to play, though not perfect. Many Suikoden fans will be happy to see that your party can consist of up to 6 characters who can participate in battle, plus up to 3 extra characters in your entourage who can perform support roles such as providing healing during battles, increase potch earned after battles, and perform services like item appraisal, trading in of items for potch, or providing skill training. With up to 9 slots with which to fill your party, you can finally really get to use a good chunk of those 108 characters you recruit. And while we're on the subject of those 108 characters though, you will need a guide to get all the Stars of Destiny. And in order to get the ending that doesn't suck, you will need to get all 108 Stars of Destiny. And to complicate matters, many of these characters are permanently missable, so be sure to keep an extra save file as you go, just in case. Battle within Suikoden 5 is great. Auto battles return from previous entries, which helps remove the tedium of some of the grind, and you can unlock additional party formations which affect stats, abilities, that adds an extra layer of strategy that you definitely should not ignore. Managing party formations and character positions, however, felt a little tedious to manage, which is echoed in party equipment and item management because everything is done backwards. Rather than selecting a character first and then filling in slots with equipment, you select equipment and then choose who to apply it to. This just felt so wrong, even by the end of the game. The large-scale battles within Suikoden 5 took on the form of a very simple, real-time strategy that overall was a lot of fun. There were a few points of frustration stemming from difficulty issuing commands effectively though. Being able to pause the game while trying to navigate and command other units would have been an improved experience overall, but the battles were fortunately infrequent enough that they still felt pretty novel by the end of the game. While navigating, the enemy encounter rate felt pretty high, but maybe not so bad as Suikoden 4. The transition period while loading battles was noticeably longer than it should have been though, or maybe the transition animation just wasn't long and fluid enough to mask those loading times. Either way, battles dragged exploration to a halt, which made the few dungeons in the game harder to navigate than they really should have been. And also, while we're talking about dungeons, they kinda sucked in my opinion. They just weren't very interesting visually. They were mostly comprised of long hallways with buttons on the end to press, which opened up other paths to other hallways. Fortunately, the amount of time you actually spend in these dungeons is mercifully short, considering the overall duration of the game is about 70 hours. The country of Falena was pretty to explore, and the Asian-inspired towns and villages were a treat to explore as I looked for new characters to recruit. Suikoden 5 actually gives you a real overworld map this time around, which is always much appreciated, and the locations throughout the map were all unique, including each of the towns, no two of which looked like carbon copies of each other. But while looking at these locations, you might not be able to help but notice that pretty much the entire game is shown to you in this wide, pulled-out isometric view. Unfortunately, the game doesn't give you the controls to bring the camera in any closer, or to take a look at any of the details of the map, or even pan or rotate. It took some getting used to, if I'm being honest, but eventually I got used to it and enjoyed the game a lot despite the lack of camera control. And in doing so, I remembered that the beauty of not having access to the camera means the world was designed so that the player doesn't need to move the camera, which I must admit was pretty nice. I feel like this style of presentation did a nice job of emulating the perspectives of Suikoden 1 and 2, making it feel kind of like a 2D game made with polygonal assets. Also, I'm pretty sure that run cycles are the bane of the existence of animators at Konami because I still haven't seen a Suikoden run cycle that didn't look terrible since the jump to the PlayStation 2, and Suikoden 5 is unfortunately no exception to that. Even the in-engine scenes had some mocap animations that just didn't look natural. However, the pre-rendered cutscenes were actually really nicely done. For a game by a major developer like Konami by the end of the PlayStation 2's lifespan though, I really would have expected a bit more. The music of Suikoden 5 though is phenomenal, and it was one of the game's best parts, aside from the story anyway, and while there wasn't a whole lot of it, the voice acting that we got in the game was pretty top-notch.
This town has indeed felt Arstad's wrath.
Unfortunately, Suikoden 5 was the final numbered entry in the series, and the last Suikoden to be released on a console. The game didn't sell too well in Japan either, less than 200,000 copies, about a third less than Suikoden 4. I suspected a big part of that was the fact that the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 were already out by the time Suikoden 5 was released, and most gamers had moved on to the next generation. To put that into perspective, Blue Dragon came out the same year as Suikoden 5, so 5 simply slipped under the radar for most. As a result, the game is still a bit pricey these days, and with no alternative ways to play it, access to the game can be fairly cost prohibitive. I do hope that someday we'll see the game get ported to a modern console, but it kinda doesn't sound like Konami is giving the series much thought these days. Now, despite all of my little nitpicks here and there, Suikoden 5 was still a lot of fun to play, and while I enjoyed my time with Suikoden 4 and Tactics, Suikoden 5 was definitely the high point of this year's Summer of Suikoden. Between its compelling storytelling, its amazing characters, and its fun gameplay, this game has easily earned itself a spot in the game collection.